When we look at the catalogue of real-time strategy games, or RTS games as they're commonly known as, there's one series that always comes to mind with regards to the history of the popularity of this genre, and that would be Command & Conquer. They would see a release on multiple different consoles and systems, originally starting off on the DOS and Windows PC in 1995, but would later be added to the Sega Saturn and PlayStation in 1996, and even another edition would be added later on the Nintendo 64 in 1999. That would be one of the best-selling and most popular real-time strategy games ever in the history of video games, where you find yourself in the middle of a war between two factions, between the Global Defense Initiative GDI and the Brotherhood of Nod, where you're tasked, regardless of which side you choose, depending on whether you're playing on consoles or so forth. You would usually gain access to two discs, especially on the PlayStation version. One disc would be for the GDI and the others would be for the Brotherhood of Nod, where you play through the campaigns of each, and your goal is literally to win the battles while also gathering resources, using them to produce and build out bases, gather troops, eliminating opposing threats, armies, capturing pretty much the land, and with your goal essentially to taking over the region, even the world. So both factions are fighting for supremacy in that area. So the game will task you with using like point and click elements, where you have a mouse and a cursor, so you have to drag the mouse around different elements in order to highlight them so that you can manipulate them to get them to move and to attack and so forth. And if you're playing on the PlayStation, you will use the triangle button in order to bring up the menu system so that you can build out additional resources. But in order to build out the resources that are required, you first need to build like a station, then build power stations, and then you can build other camps and other resources. You can build refineries that can allow for like trucks to go out and refine materials that is known as Tiberium that you'll use for harvesting. So you'll need to use that in order to generate money so that you can keep building troops and keep building your army and keep upgrading your resources and firepower, which later in the game you'll be able to develop weapons, develop vehicles like tanks, jeeps, even like air defense systems and so forth, so that you can take full advantage of the situation. But you also have to deal with opposing threats always trying to attack you and wipe you out. So when you've spawned on the map, you'll always have some sort of threat lurking around the corner pretty much. So when you do start off a level, pretty much in games, if you've seen the likes of Dune, even on the likes of the Sega CD and other games that came before it, the majority of the world map that you're in when you're playing in a specific level is usually blacked out, and your goal is to traverse ever so carefully with enough resources available that you can explore different areas to see what's there, but also to locate any upcoming threats. Pretty much you're scouting ahead to make sure that everything is safe so that you can move more resources and army elements in so that you can try and either invade or take over a certain part or building or area in order to complete the mission. So you'll have anything from the likes of machine gunners to grenadiers, tanks. You'll even be able to enlist the expertise of technicians that you can use to enter buildings that can take them over, so you don't need to always be blowing everything up. Sometimes there is often a strategy that can be in place to make things a lot simpler if you know what you're doing. Now the game itself was so popular that it broke many sales records upon its release on all the systems it released on. The game was highly received on every platform with great reviews across the board, with an average score of at least 90%, if not higher in most cases. And so much so that the game would end up spawning a multitude of different sequels that would be developed for consoles even up until recent years. Two of them would release on the PlayStation with Command & Conquer Red Alert and Command & Conquer Retaliation. That would also be very popular. Regardless of the platform the game was released on, it did pretty well, let's just put it that way. The series itself has a really good lasting legacy, even to a point that within the last couple of years the original developers have gotten together and remastered the entire collection in its entirety for modern systems that you can even play on the likes of Steam. With more refined visuals, even tweaked controls, the game just looks better and is more suited to modern systems. There'll be a link down below in the description to the Steam page if you want to gain access to the game, and I would keep an eye out because the game is often on sale, so you will be able to get the series for a really cheap price if you keep an eye out. Definitely worth investing in, I highly admit, because even my own experience going back when I first played this game, now in general I wouldn't have been well versed or even really knew much about strategy games as such, and even when I was younger I wouldn't have really played many of them, or I wouldn't have allowed myself to play a lot of them, because anything where I didn't have full control over a character that I could move around at any time, I often usually avoid it. It would have been the same with the likes of RPG games, especially when I first even played the likes of Final Fantasy VII. It took me a while to get used to it, because knowing that you had to take turns in order to do stuff, I didn't have the patience to wait my turn. I like to just go in and just batter everything that was there. But then I got to play Command and Conquer. And the funny thing is, a mate of mine that originally had the PlayStation that I played for the first time, he got it like a couple of months later. He rented it out one weekend, and I remember staying over at his house and he had it. Now, he was a big fan of sci-fi, anything that was sci-fi related, and the fact is Command and Conquer had all of those elements. It was based in the future, and I sat there and watched it, and I thought to myself, at first I was like, I'm probably not going to like this, but then at the same time I thought it was very cool. The graphics were quirky. The fact is that it was extremely violent, even with the sound effects and the people screaming, and being able to build out armies and just utilise all the elements that was there at your disposal in order to either attack or defend. But I was intrigued by it. It took me a while to get used to, but the funny thing is, it was a game that I didn't think I would like, but when I started playing it I was like, you know what, this is really cool. Now I will admit, it did take me a while to get familiar with the controls. It took me a good while, in fact. Even to a point that I remember we used cheats, I think, to find a hidden level where you could play like as a special agent, where he's a one-man show where he goes in and you have to try and kill everybody in the map. And let's just put it this way, it doesn't end well. You'd be dead within the first couple of hits. But it was funny to try, just to see how far you could get. He was literally like a crack shot where you could kill nearly everything in one hit. But if you got surrounded by a multitude of enemies, you'd be gone. You'd be dead straight away. But still, I thought it was really, really cool. And it's one of those games where you can find yourself putting hours into it, even just on one level. You could be sitting for ages trying to think of strategies and just taking your time. If anything, if you enjoy games that allow you to take your time, this is definitely the game for you. Even to a point that I remember about a year or so later, when I was collecting the likes of the demo magazines, I remember getting one of the magazines, I think it was the Essential PlayStation. It was, yeah, because it was volume 4, and the demo disc had 10 different playable demos. There was anything from the likes of Tomb Raider to Disruptor and a lot of other really cool games. If anything, it was one of the best demo CDs that I ever had in terms of the actual games that were on it. They were all high quality games. And I remember a demo of the third level of the GDI section of Command and Conquer was on it. And if I'll be honest, that was probably one of the most played demos I ever spent time with on that disc itself. I played that demo to death. I just found Command and Conquer to be one of the most addictive games I've ever played. I can't swear enough by it, because like some other games that I've mentioned, there was a few other games that I played on the PlayStation that originally I never thought I'd ever get into, but ended up being some of the best experiences that I've ever had with a game. International Track and Field is one of them. I wouldn't be a big fan of the Olympics, and I wasn't when I was younger, nor did I think it would have been a good game. But you put that game together with your mates in the multiplayer mode, and if you have a multi-tap, for me it's the best multiplayer experience you can have on the PlayStation. I never played a game where I laughed so much. Even to this day, it's the funniest game I have ever played in my life. It's just hilarious, especially when you're playing with your mates. But the same can be said for Command and Conquer due to its addictive qualities. Yes, it's also a game that forces you to think, forces you to take your time, which you will have to do a lot of. But I don't know, it's weird. It's one of those games that I never thought that I'd like, but yet I found it myself being more addicted to it the more that I played it. And even when I go back to play it again every so often, which I do because I'm so fond of it, I find myself getting addicted to it all over again. Even for recording footage for this video, I went and played the first couple of levels. I spent nearly an hour playing it, just with no issue at all, and I wanted to play more. I wanted to keep going. That'll tell you the addictive quality that this game presents, and even the series, because even going back, one of my younger brothers did get the sequel, Command and Conquer Red Alert, as a Christmas present one year, and we had played that because we rented it out one weekend. And to be honest, sure, that was the same. Whether it was the first game or whether it was Command and Conquer Red Alert, we were addicted to the games because the sequel is very similar to the first. Great soundtrack as well, mind you, and that's what I liked even about the first Command and Conquer. The soundtrack to it was brilliant. Some really catchy tunes that are definitely worth listening to. Absolutely. Some of them are, in my opinion, amongst some of the best on the PlayStation. But that also added to it, because you were playing a really cool strategy game, but that you also had really cool background music that was something you never expected, but that really suited the experience. It just added to it and gave it so much depth. And from playing Command and Conquer, I have to admit, it has given me a newfound respect for RTS games. Like, even going back, I've even played other games in recent times, even with some of the older Dune games. I even played one a couple of months ago as of recording this video. I played it on an emulator on the Sega CD. I played one of the early Dune titles, and I have to say, I thought that was really enjoyable as well. Again, I didn't think that I'd enjoy it, but because I was so familiar with playing Command and Conquer, a lot of these games use similar gameplay traits, and if you played enough of them, it won't take you long to figure out really what to do, but you just have to sit down and be patient with them. But I can't highlight this game enough. For me, it's one of the best strategy games I've ever played. If anything, for me, it's my favourite strategy game I think that I've ever played. It was the first one, and for me, I still think that it's the best. Well, yes, it has sequels that technically are better, but for me, this is the best one. I think a lot of it boils down to when I first played the PlayStation, because I would have played this game within the first year of playing the console, and everything was still new to me at that time. Games that I never would have played or even thought of or even considered before, I found myself playing on the console, because I'll be brutally honest, the PlayStation for me, like I always say, is my favourite console of all time. But it was also the console that I genuinely was that eager to literally play everything that was there. It didn't matter what it was, whether it was a fighting game, anything, even games that, even with fighting games for that matter, there were certain games that when I first seen them, I was a bit reluctant to try them, but then I started playing them, was like, you know what, these are actually freaking good. And that's how I found myself being drawn into a lot of these games, because they were way better than I expected. The PlayStation really just had that appeal so much in a way that it just drew you into literally every game that you played, whether it be from a demo, from a highlight reel, or a rolling video demo that you'd often see in magazines. There was always enough appeal there, or say a mate that had a game, which in this case, that's how I got to playing Command & Conquer for the first time. There was always something there, and you'd find yourself playing it, often reluctantly at times, but then you'd find yourself thinking to yourself, you know what, this is something, there's something here, this is really, really good. And that's what I love about the console, because it was the system that allowed me to get away from that. It allowed me to open my mind to the different possibilities that were out there, because truth be told, I was very set in my ways, but this console helped to change that. And all you have to see is the vast selection of games that are available on it. Like, look at the racing games, you look at the survival horror games like Resident Evil, like there's so many games on it that you'd never think in a million years that'd be as good as they are, but yet they are among some of the best you'll ever play. But if not, they also set the foundation and were the beginning stages of something that will go on to see greatness, and many of these games were the catalyst for that. Command & Conquer is no exception in that rule. It's a fantastic game, it's a great series. Whether you have the older games on the PlayStation or older consoles with the Sega Saturn and PC, even the new remastered edition that you can get on Steam, I highly recommend that you play this series. If not, start with the original game and go from there. It's an iconic collection, definitely worth your time, very, very addictive when you do start to play it and get into it, so just be warned. But yeah, I can't say enough good things about this. I just love playing Command & Conquer. I think it's a brilliant strategy game, very worthwhile in my book, and I'm sure many of you will think the same if you've played it or if you haven't. But if you have played it, I would love to know your thoughts and what you think of it overall. You enjoy this series of games equally as much as I have over the years, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other games similar to this that were also released on the PlayStation, you can leave a like on the video, and be sure to check out this playlist here on screen to see more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.